Those two big pillows, they stay on the floor at the end of the bed all the time.
As long as she's got a roof over her head,
Cindy's got
it's too comfortable.
She doesn't have a job right now, but until money's coming, that's hard. Exactly.
I don't understand why. Of course, I think her mom is like that too. She says she's paying rent.
Everyone seems quiet tonight, seems like a smaller crowd. Kind of freaking me out a little bit.
I thought of something if you get time.
Yep.
The medication, the treatment, okay. So if they're on the injection, that's a monthly injection of, what's it called? I can't remember.
Vivitrol.
No, his is something else.
Not Vivitrol?
He's on, how long's he been on it?
3 months.
Okay.
But I was wondering about that, that's something she and I was trying to remember what I was gonna ask you a while back. When they're on that shot, and it's not like them being off of anything, like, so, okay, if they're not on anything, then their brain clears. If they're on that
No, so,
maintenance medication, does their brain clear out?
Yeah.
To where they don't want the drugs, or?
so medication-assisted treatment, let's just talk about that part of the process, about the medication that's available to help people with substances. And we'll start with opioids, all right? So opioids, I don't have it, and I don't have the ability to draw it because I don't want to erase that beautiful stuff over there. People have worked on that for a while. All right, so think of it so there's when you take an opioid, it's considered what's called a full agonist, which means it binds fully and completely with the mu receptor in the brain, okay? And that's what stops pain. That's also what will get you high, all right? Especially, obviously, if you overdo it, right? So if I'm supposed to take one pain pill every 4 hours, but I take 4 pain pills every 1 hour, I'm flooding that and I'm going to go ahead and get that effect I want, right? All right. So you become addicted, you become physically addicted to this. You are sick when you don't have it. You're having these incredible cravings and you can't quit thinking about it. And so medication-assisted treatment, starting with what's called buprenorphine is the generic, and the brand name that everyone knows most is Suboxone. Okay. That binds halfway. It's called a partial agonist. And so what it does is it fills the mu receptor halfway. So if you got this effect from a full agonist, you're going to get this effect from a partial agonist. That it is enough to keep you from going through withdrawals. But the idea would be if you're dosed correctly, meaning if you're taking the right amount and you've been honest with the doctor and he's had an opportunity to get you on the right amount, you won't get that same euphoric feeling and you won't therefore have the same negative effects, and you can recover in terms of the way your brain functions as well. Okay? Does that answer it?
It does. I still can't think, I don't know why I cannot think of what whatever he's having, they inject it in his stomach and it stays in a little pouch there and it releases all month long.
Yeah. So it must be the injectable buprenorphine.
It is.
Same deal. It's probably
I
even.
can't think of what it's called for the life
Yeah.
of me, but
So it's basically the same thing I just described, except you're not taking it. It's actually like good because that makes it less likely that the person's going to divert it for other things, you know.
well, I've read a lot about it, but it seems like if they don't stay on that maintenance medication, then they'll go into withdrawals just like they would have
Right.
if they were on heroin.
Right, because once it comes off, if he didn't get it every month,
Right.
eventually it would leave his system, and it would come off, and he would feel sick the same way he would
Right.
from anything else.
So I guess the difference between like somebody, okay, so I've read all kind of stuff and I've seen people's comments about it. But I guess I wonder, and I've seen people comment and say, well, are we just trading one drug for another? Are we still going with the pharmaceutical companies? Because now my insurance pays for my son's shot, but I see how much it costs. And
Yeah, so
$1,600, there's no way somebody could continue to afford that if it wasn't on insurance.
yeah, it's you'll hear people say that a lot. I don't know if you guys could hear the comment, or if you could hear the comment out there in Facebook.
Sublocade, that's what it's called.
So, are you trading one drug for the other? I don't think you're trading one drug for the other when you're trading a full agonist for a partial agonist, okay? Or even a long-acting agonist like methadone, for example. It's two different mechanisms. It's not that simple. And also, if you're doing it in the context of, and especially an injectable that's released over time, that's in a clinic that's supervised, I mean, in that case, you can't even divert it. You can't even give it to your buddies or sell it on the street.
Right, absolutely.
The real problem with all medications, with every medication, whether it's Suboxone, Sublocade, not Sublocade because it's an injectable, but methadone or any other medicine that we get, is that people don't use them the way that they're supposed to.
Right.
They use for a couple days and they go use other things and they keep them up in the cupboard when they need them, or they trade them to people for other stuff, or they sell them. And you get into this situation where they're actually being used for something other than what they're intended. Then they become a recreational tool or a financial tool, right? So that's when it gets really, really tough with these different medications. The way to think of it, if you're a parent or somebody who's trying to offer somebody advice or do anything about this, is your loved one has, if it's an opioid use disorder, we'll start there. Your loved one has a medical condition that every option should be brought to the table. Every possible option should be discussed. And people will go through stages and they'll work through a different process to make a determination on what they want to do. Maybe they'll try, I'm going to go to detox, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to rehab, and I'm just going to do this, what I guess you would call that traditional sort of route, right? And maybe that does or doesn't work. And you know what I mean? Like it's not unlike a lot of other medical conditions where we have to try a lot of different things to see what happens. And there's an ideal way to do it. And what do I mean by ideal? There's a holistic way to do it. Like if you take diabetes is supposed to be about more than just insulin. It's supposed to be about your diet and your exercise. So MAT in an ideal world would be about more than just the medicine. Although I don't think we should deny medicine to anyone, and I don't think we should make medicine difficult to get. And then the last thing I want to say about that is that recovery is a process and people change over time. And don't get caught up on, holy cow, what are we going to do a year from now or 6 months from now or even 90 days from now? You know what you're doing on this day. This is more for your loved one. You know what you're doing on this day. Let's just continue to walk that path. We'll figure out what to do down the road. Because I've worked with a lot of people here in South Carolina, but also in my private practice in Pennsylvania when I was there. I worked with a lot of people who were on Suboxone and they were not getting supported at all by anybody else really than me. The world had kind of shut them off as second-class citizens. And I found that they would get way up in their head on what they should be doing. And they would be like, oh my, I can't be on this forever.
Right.
And I can't, what am I going to do? I can't afford it. And it's kind of like take a deep breath and know what you're doing for right now today. And then over time, you start to make different decisions just like you do with anything else, just like I had to do in recovery. What I do in recovery today is way different than what I did when I had 19 days. So it's that kind of thinking. It becomes this major league controversial, like wringing your hands, what should we do and which one's better and which one. Let me tell you, can we all agree with this? Like doing something is better than doing nothing. And we can also agree that being alive is better than being dead. And we can't deny the fact that this medicine saves lives. There's no question about it. And it gets people, this is where I can speak to this, because I personally did this for years. Even here at FAVOR, I don't really get to do it much anymore, but for a long time I did this. I absolutely know for sure that it gets people stabilized and they get on a path of recovery. Nobody even knows they're on it. Nobody even knows they're on it. They're doing all the things that everyone else is doing, and they're living life, and they're going and getting a job, and they're doing, and you know what I mean? Unless they were to tell you, you wouldn't even know. So, so keep it as simple as you possibly can around that. And that's the advice I would give to your loved one too. Okay. Let's talk a little bit, just taking some questions. And if anybody out there has a question, if you put it on this, I don't know what you call this. This is a live stream. If you put it on there, my daughter's here. She'll let me know what the question is. Let us know where you're from, though. I just always like saying it like me. So where you're from out there. All right. So the other question was, what do we do if a person winds up landed in jail? And I want to expand that beyond even jail. What do we do if a person lands in any situation where they're kind of asking for your help? We'll frame it up even wider than that. What do I mean by that? They wind up going to jail and they want to be bailed out. They don't pay the rent for 6 months and they're about to get evicted because they've been using the money for substances. They lose their car and they want you to buy a car. They lose their house and they want to move back in. Any situation where the behavior has directly led to consequences. So the first thing we want to say is that the details matter. The details matter. What do I mean by details? We've talked about this in here before. What kind of things do you take into consideration when you decide whether or not you bail the person out or whether or not you sign another lease or whatever it may be? What kind of stuff?
How long? Or how
I feel like how long you've been dealing with this is a huge, huge thing. And how many times have you had this conversation before? You get where I'm coming from? It's, what if you've done this 5 times in the last 6 months, you probably want to rethink this. And that's the determining factor on whether or not you go. People would label that rescue the person. I don't know if I like that terminology, but that's what they would say. Get that? Do you get that part? What other things get in the way? What other things come into consideration around this? What's that?
How old they are.
How old they are have a lot to do with it, which always a lot of times relates to how long you've been dealing with it. You hear other people say things like co-occurring disorders, and there's other issues, and I'm worried about them. They're dealing with this stuff, and I know they're not getting any help for this in there. They have to get their medicine taken away, and they have a mental health issue. Like there might be urgency associated with it, that kind of thing. So, and anyone else can weigh in on this question of what do you do if they're in there. The first thing you do is you don't immediately go get them, right? The first piece of advice I have is that you don't act on your first impulse when you get the call. That would be jump right in the car and go right over and see, post bail and get them out. Sometimes in these situations, guys, when it comes to figuring this stuff out, it's easier to start with what do we not do than it is what do we do. Because the what do we do part it could go many different ways, and there's probably no right answer. So what do we not do? We don't immediately get in the car and go and bail them out. Agreed? What else do we not do? Lecture. We don't try to use it as a way to make a point, because that'll happen too. That you're not there to win a debate. There's no merit in getting somebody to say, yeah, I get it. You know how many people I've seen say the right thing to their families and say the right thing with me in the room and tell the family exactly what they want to hear and just continue doing what they were doing? So you don't want to use it as a time to teach a lesson in that regard. The second thing that you don't want to do is and this is going to, I'll rephrase this. We're not going to phrase this as what you don't do. You want to leave them in there. How do I want to say this? It makes a lot more sense in my head than coming out of my mouth. I know what I want to say, but I can't say it.
Make them think that you're not coming to help.
You don't want to lose the opportunity to explore whether or not you can get any mileage out of this. You do not want that person coming out of jail without you trying to take a shot at, is there a way to turn this into a trip to rehab, or is there a way to turn this into some kind of supervised programming that the person has to do? Is there a way to get some kind of mileage out of this situation? Is there a way to capitalize on the crisis and not just go down there and get the person out? So how does that typically go down? And it's very different for different people. Sometimes the person will have a personal attorney or attorney that you pay for that you can talk to, and you'll say, like, listen, here's what we would like to see happen. And you call FAVOR, you call the 24-hour hotline, and they say, here's a program the person could get in when they get out. And you basically get like the process to say, you can leave jail if you're going to get in the car and go to rehab. So you try to get something out of it in that regard, which also goes to the fact that you don't just run and pull them out. What else would you guys share regarding that response?
Well, as far as getting them to go somewhere, maybe have it already worked out, a plan of where he could go, or have it all worked out where all he needs to do is say, yes, I'll go, and then get him out, and then he goes. Have it already worked out.
You'd have to try to work it out. You'd have to get the resources lined up. The attorney's not going to have anything to do with setting up resources. The attorney's not going to bother with that. You got to make some phone calls. We always suggest that you can call one of us and we can give you advice if you're looking for certain types of programs. There's a reality to that as you go through it. Some of the programs that the jail, especially the jail, will push, because a lot of those folks don't have insurance and stuff, if they're free, there might not be any there might be a waiting list. But you don't want to just, you want to try to see, can we move the needle on some type of recovery? Is there anything specific more that you would want to say about that I could fill in the blanks a little bit more? Is there anything else about that situation that's unique to him or her?
I guess.
No, go ahead. I was asking. Yeah, go ahead.
This just happened, and I mean, so I've been coming here because this has happened to him before, and I've noticed the symptoms coming back, and I've talked to him. They said, Chris, let's go get you help. I don't need to know anything that you've done up till this point, but, I see that you're failing. You don't care about the car. You don't care about what you look like. You're sneaking into your room without talking to the family. You're staying away. All this, and I'm fine, Mom. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it. Get out of my room.
Yeah.
And now that this has happened on Saturday, he's calling me. Get me out. Get me out.
Yeah.
I'm begging you. Get me out. Get me out, Mom. If you don't get me out, I'm done with you forever.
Yeah.
He's never said that to me before.
Right, which is, so you guys heard that statement. If you don't get me out, I'm done with you forever. You got to remember that has a lot to do with the desperate state of mind and the irrational. You want to try to put that on the shelf and just leave it there for the time being, and get to this place of like, what can we get out of this process? So in your situation, what's interesting is, so there's no one that can look at any of you and say, I guarantee if so-and-so does this, they're going to be good to go. I guarantee, but we do know that if they're doing something, that they're probably going to have a better shot at it than if they're not. We can agree to that. So can you turn this into somehow, some way, there's some kind of, I don't know if it's a probation officer or some kind of deal where he has to at the very least be going to meetings, at the very least be seeing an outpatient
I don't
therapist.
really know what happened.
Yeah. That'll be the toughest part.
The police officer was supposed to call me. I haven't heard anything.
So he hasn't asked you for an attorney.
No.
So he'll get a public defender. When he calls, you could start saying that. You could start saying, I'm open to talking about what to do here, but I'm not just going to get you out so you can just come back home and be in your room. Do you guys get that? I'm not just going to get you out of jail so you can come back and be in your room. Talk to me about what you're going to
You
do.
even got a friend ask me, hey, if you let me borrow the money, I'll go get him out and be responsible for him. Like, where's he going to go? He can't come back and keep doing the same thing that he's been doing.
That money ain't going to make it there either.
Right.
Don't do that.
So.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't give his friend any money or anybody any money to do anything like that. If you do it, you got to, you go but you're trying to, and many times it's impossible to do anything because you can't even talk to anybody. You can't get to the person, so the person will go through the process. You will probably continue to get the phone calls, and I would take my time with it. And so here's the thing: there's nothing pleasant about Greenville County Detention Center, but it is not Rikers Island. It's not Alcatraz. You know, like it's not prison. It's not good, but it's not. It's for a lot of people, it's a safer place than being in a room shooting dope or doing whatever they were doing. You know what I mean? So the other thing is it gives you a chance to take a breath and start to think this through a little bit.
So does anybody know, like, if somebody lands there, and I really don't know what he's been using or how much, but like he said, something's wrong with me. I need to go to the hospital, Mom. Come get me and bring me to your hospital. Chris, you feel bad. If you're not using your stuff, you're gonna feel bad.
When did he go in?
Saturday.
So today's what, Monday? When was the last time you got a call from him?
Today at work is the first time I talked to him.
Okay, all right,
He called me at work and I had a chance to go in the closet, like,
yeah,
Chris.
yeah.
You don't have any idea what he's been messing with.
Well, I can see what his charges are.
No, what drugs?
Yeah, you don't know specifically, no, nope. So you'd have to, so that's the really hard part because,
So I
again.
just told him to go, there's a infirmary there, Chris.
Yeah.
If you feel bad, ask to talk to a nurse.
He's going to tell you he can't. He's going to tell you they won't let me. He's going to tell you they're not
He
doing
says, I need to
anything
go to
for
the
me.
hospital, there's something
Because I
really
would
wrong
think
with me.
they would do a urine test when he goes in there.
I mean, does anybody know if they like watch these kids for this stuff, or they just like thrown into a room and?
No, they're going to go in and he's going to be processed and he's not going to get anything specific related to that. If he starts asking, then he'll probably get looked at. You know, it definitely has more attention on it than it's ever had, but he's not going to get, it's not going to be routinely looked at. It's not going to be one of these things where he's going to be screened for anything other than processed into jail. So, you know, that part of it is true. The deal is, how serious do you think that is, and where do you think it's at? If it's been 3 days, he's probably like the biggest threat around any kind of withdrawal is probably over. In terms of what could have gone wrong. That's
No matter
good.
how much he used?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the most immediate, it's immediate, man. It's like, you know, this stuff, it's called acute withdrawal. So it's immediate. Like when I come off of the opioids, it hits me. And I'm going to go through it in jail right away. So if I make it 3 days, if he went in on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you know, by the time tomorrow comes, he's out of the woods in terms of, he's out of the woods probably related to danger, but he's probably uncomfortable as can be. And I'm in no way suggesting that that's a good way for a person to get better. I'm suggesting that it's a way for you guys to get a chance to think and say, what do I do now? You have a situation where you're trying to get your loved one, whether it's a kid or a husband, wife, whatever it is, to kind of do the right thing. And let's get some help and let's do. And they're like, no, I'm good. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. Screw that. I'm not going to do. And then all of a sudden there's this thing called the legal system that comes in and says, well, we don't really care how you feel about this. You're going to do what we tell you to do. And that, unfortunately, there's just a reality to this disorder. That's sometimes required to even give the person a chance or give you a chance to even catch your breath. You guys all in here know what it's like to live in constant crisis, where you can't even take a minute to think on what you want to do because you're trying to figure out the next problem to solve related to this. So you take your time, you talk about it like you are now. The very specific thing would be, can I get a hold of anybody at the jail or any attorney, or how do you find out where, you know, when the court hearing is and that kind of stuff. And if he doesn't want to give you information, then you say, well, we can't do anything until I start to know this stuff. That makes sense to everybody in here? How old is he?
26.
Yeah. Yep. So it's kind of, unfortunately, this is very common. Very common.
Well, this has been going on since he was 14.
Yeah.
He was doing really, really well for a big chunk of time, and it was like a major relapse.
You got to figure, what do we want? What would be, what would we like to see him do? What would be helpful? And it would be the stuff that comes to your mind is therapy, groups, maybe, you know, whatever it is, if it's medication-assisted treatment. I'm open to all that stuff, but what do we want him to do? And is this an opportunity to get him to do it? You know, remember, guys, you're dealing with this brain issue. So let's get to it, right? You're dealing with this idea of if you have somebody, and this represents, if you're new, this represents the change that occurs in a person's brain over time when you chronically expose alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, mood-altering, mind-altering chemicals. And it's no longer rational. It's no longer choice. It's about compulsion. It's about use despite clear consequences. And jail can be something that can deal with this, whereas sometimes we can't. I don't have a better answer than that. I wish there was a way to turn jails for low-time offenses into treatment centers, you know, and it would be automatic, and you would be sitting here getting calls from him, and he'd be like, you know, this sucks, but you knew he was getting treatment. You know what I mean? Like, that would be an ideal world. Right now, we don't have that ability. Yes.
When they do drug tests, the situation that I was involved in last week, they said her drug test just came up positive for pot.
Okay.
She was totally acting like someone coming off meth. Is it possible that it had been just long enough or whatever that didn't
Well,
show
so
up?
marijuana will stay in your system a lot longer. The question was, how can, you know somebody, you think they're using methamphetamine or opioids or whatever it is, but they only come up positive for THC. All those other drugs, opioids, methamphetamine and stuff, are going to clear in 2 to 3 days.
Okay.
So that could have something to do with it. You always hear this, like the only thing was marijuana, and I don't know how that could possibly have happened. I don't think that was, how's that even possible? It's just because it stays in your system for a tremendously long period of time.
And it was totally the mental health and the substance use. We had her a place to go, and then a drug place to go, and the psychiatrist came in and said, oh no, she's got to go somewhere where there's a psychiatrist on staff. And next thing we knew, they had her in lockdown.
So they took over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, that's why I left. Her mom's calling saying now they're saying they're going to kick her out. So
We've
System
talked
is
about
so
this before.
broken.
When you talk about available help, and you talk about available places to go, there is a reality to this situation that is there's nothing you can say about it other than it sucks. I don't know how else to say it. I could stand up here and try to put a bow on it, but there's no way you can. There are limited resources if you don't have money and you don't have insurance. If you have money and insurance, you still have the issues around, are they going to go? How do I get them there? Who's going to help me do that? But you don't have a lot of options. And it's almost like you start to work with the family, or you start to think of this yourself in your situations, where it's like, we're going to have to ride this out, and this is going to be going on in the community, and this is the reality of the situation, and so here's what we're going to do and how we're going to educate ourselves, and you probably intervene when things get really bad, you know, but make no mistake, even if you have resources, it's still ups and downs. It's just that the resources, if you don't have resources, the downs tend to be really, really down whenever you finally notice, you know. Age has so much to do with it, guys. Age and the length of time that you've been dealing with this is such an important thing. I've had people who've been dealing with this if you've been dealing with it for 20 years, it's so different than if you've been dealing with it for 5 or 10. At a certain point in time, you have to take a look at what's going down and say, I've got to do this completely different. I'm not bailing them out of jail. I'm not paying for anything, and I am going to step back because the evidence just suggests there's never going to be a change unless I do that. You get that? Which is so different than we've been trying to do something about this for 5 years or 10 years. I feel like you've got to keep that in mind as you go through. Do not take an umbrella, or a broad brush and just paint with this broad brush and say, here's how we're going to do it. Rich said leave him in jail, or Joe said kick him out of the house. That's not how this is. Take my advice and put it through your own template of what you're dealing with. The only thing I would say hands down is if you got somebody who goes to jail, take a minute to think, because you probably haven't, Carol, you were going to say something.
That was the question again.
You forgot the question.
I was just so intently listening to her.
Do you forget what you were going to ask? Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
How long does a person need to be abstinent to be able to work on trauma and or other mental health issues? Michael Crouch.
So it's a fantastic question. How long does a person have to be stable to work on trauma or other mental health? So you come in, we've talked about co-occurring disorders before. 60 to 70% of people who have a substance use disorder are also dealing with some type of co-occurring issue. When can they start working on the mental health? Day one, immediately. Immediately. There is no such thing as waiting until the drugs clear your system so you can get to it. You're obviously going to have an easier time talking to somebody about their mental health history at day 30 than you did at day one, but you can start immediately. So as a trauma therapist, I'm an EMDR certified trauma therapist, and you'll hear a lot of people say, I won't work on that with that person until she's stable, until she quits drinking. But what if the trauma is the thing that's driving the drinking? Do you get that? Like, so I'm going to wait and wait and wait, but she's been drinking to mask sexual abuse or something. So basically get in there and start it right away. There is no such thing as waiting. Here's the problem with that. A lot of programs do want to wait. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, it's one of those things that are kind of like urban legend where we have to wait until this clears before we go there. It's very hard to find people that will work with somebody who has a mental health issue until they're stable with substances. And you can kind of see the logic with that, right? It's hard to tell the difference. But I can tell you the answer to the question is you can start immediately. You can get the person. You want to get them to a specialty therapist. What other questions? What other questions out there?
Do they, if their son's in jail time, like more than a few months, do they help them with the mental health? And obviously, they're not going to be using drugs because they.
So if they get, so the question was, if they wind up in jail, will they wind up helping them with mental health? And I think that that's one of those things that varies from place to place. I do know that it's available and that you can seek out that type of help. And if you have a history and you come in with a history, they're going to try to continue to help you with that. But it's not an experience like being in a treatment center or anything like that, where you're like, I'm going to go see the psychiatrist now. You have to probably work your butt off to get put on a list. You probably have to be a little bit of a pain in the butt with the guard. You know what I mean? Hey, I need to see somebody. I need to see somebody. I need to see somebody. But it is an option. There are social workers. There are people there. They do run. I know that they run a group. There is a group that but it's always full. Do you get it? Like, so the deal is, yes, it's there, but am I going to actually get a chance to get to it? So, what other questions though about this? Yes.
I was going to add something. This is kind of funny. Now I can laugh about it, but a few years ago I probably wasn't laughing about it. But when you were giving her advice about, step back and give it some time and let him stay in jail a little while, and she talked about how his friend said, just give me the money, I'll go get him out. My son, and that's what's funny, I was sitting here just kind of laughing to myself. My son actually met somebody in jail, and he wanted me to give that guy the money, somebody that he didn't even know, to bail him out, which was funny, but in a way, that's why everybody does need to step back and because I really thought about it. I thought about doing it because I was trying to help him, which I didn't do it. But that's how crazy we as parents also, or loved ones get. We start believing what they say.
Yeah, and so you start to make these decisions based on the factors that I've given you. One of the things, and remember, you guys have heard me say things about it's not as simple as don't give him a sandwich until he goes to rehab. You've heard me say that. And the problem with that is that it's too broad-based. It's too broad of a thing to say to everyone in this room. But make no mistake, there might be some of you who shouldn't really do anything until the person is seeking help, because you can't really do anything else, especially if you've gone round and round 10 times, 12 times, 16 times, whatever it may be. Now, this is where I would differ. This is where I would differ with most people. When I say that, hey, I'm not going to give you a sandwich until you're doing something, I paint a wider, I have a wider gate than rehab. or meetings, or I'm saying let's talk about what that thing can be, because it can be a wide variety of things, okay? So I'm not going to get you out until you do something. To me, that I'm not saying that means you got to go to rehab. It might mean that, but it could. The deal is, if you can stay involved in some type, if your loved one can stay involved in some type of mental health or recovery related process, the likelihood of them getting better is about 70%. But about 9 out of 10 people quit. And you guys may have experienced this. If you've ever had anybody go to rehab, and while they were in rehab say that they're going to do this when they get out, I'm going to get this thing. And you even have periods of time where they go like a year or two, they're doing well, but then something happens and they go back out and they start. And then what they tend to do, like if they were doing well for a period of time, is when they go back out and they drink again or they use again, they tend to just go on a full-blown run. Now, what do I mean by a full-blown run? They just go at it again like they were.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you feel like you're starting over.
Yeah, we're right back where we were a year ago.
So the deal is, okay, now if you're right back where you were a year ago.
Well, except she has a roof over her head.
Okay, but you're heading that direction, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you get to this situation where, and I'll talk in a little bit about these family meetings again, or these interventions, because if it gets back to where it was, you probably have to start over with something like that. But if you feel like it's not quite there and you're doing whatever, it's this conversation around, we're not getting you out of jail, but I will talk about what are you going to do whenever you get out, and how can we hold you accountable to that? Yes.
That was my point a while ago. So you talk to them and you say, we're gonna get you out of jail because you've agreed to do X, Y, Z, that if we get you out. Parents, I think, need to be prepared for, if they do not do the X, Y, Z, what the next step is.
Yeah,
So they can think about it ahead of time and hold that barrier.
Because that could obviously happen. The comment was, you have to be prepared whenever they say, I'll do X, Y, Z, that they get out and they say, I'm not going to do X, Y, Z. Right. Absolutely. Yes.
And then a week later, they start back in the old ones.
Yeah. This is where the attorney be involved in finding out if there's anything going down, if there's any probation, or there's anything like that that you could use. Understand, though, guys, that's the way it is for everything. That's the way it is for everything. When my wife said, you have to leave if you're not going to do something about this, Carol, it also could have been on my end, she had to be prepared that I actually had to leave.
Right.
It goes back to this idea of mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. Whatever you do, understand that there's, I don't know what percentage you want to put on it, but it's probably, I would argue, 90% likely that they're going to test you on your boundary.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to tell you what you want to hear when you're sitting there across from them in the jail and they're on the other side of the plexiglass. So you have to be prepared, and this is where taking the time to think it through and saying, like, what do I do about this? What are my options? Okay, what am I going to do if they come out? And who can I contact and who can I have on our side? If they wind up with a probation officer, am I able to use that person? Am I able to form a relationship with that person? It's all, that's what it completely comes down to.
And the same thing happens when they come out of rehab. And they make all these promises, what they're gonna do in rehab, we need to have a plan. If they come out and don't do them, what happens? And they need to know that's gonna happen.
And the thing for the family becomes so much easier said than done, but you try to step back and you try to approach this as almost like a strategy or a business plan. And okay, here's what I'm going to do if they're going to do this, and this is how we're going to handle this. And I'm going to contact the probation officer, and I don't want to do that, but here's what I'm going to do if you don't do this. People really, really, really mistake the favor flavor. So understand something, like favor is not one of these, I agree 100% with harm reduction, just addicts should be able to do whatever they want, let's just let them do whatever they want and get it. It should be decriminalized. I think there's a place for a conversation about decriminalization, but that is not what we believe. What we believe is that you can be supportive and you can talk kind to people and you don't have to punish people along the way to setting boundaries. You get the difference? Like one is like us is saying like, hey man, kind of like, it's cool, it's a disease, stuff's gonna happen, let's just let it roll. I'm not suggesting that to family members. I'm suggesting that you're gonna practice the boundaries without the tough part. Because the tough love message that you've been sent makes you think that you gotta put the hammer to people, and you gotta, makes the world think that we gotta punish addicts. Punishment never works. But at the same time, just letting people run all over you doesn't work either. So you start to work on these, and here's the biggest thing, man, that FAVOR Greenville can do for you. We can tell you straight up what the deal is. There's nothing out there in the system that is waiting to help you all. There's stuff out there that is waiting to help your loved one when your loved one says he's ready. Do you get it? If your loved one says he's ready, there are many places that they can go and they can get help. But there's nothing out there to help you all figure that out and get them into that other than us, and we're trying the best we can. And we're trying the best we can. And we're falling short in areas like interventions because we just don't have the manpower to do interventions like we used to. And we're trying to figure out how to get there. But you guys have to take stock of the situation and just be real honest with yourselves. Does that make sense? Here's the second thing that you have to know. Let's pretend I'm walking out, I'm just making all this up, but let's just pretend your loved one is in jail and you start to have the conversation and you start to think, okay, he's willing to go somewhere. Maybe we will get him out and stuff. And then you start looking for the perfect treatment center. I don't know if you've ever gone through that. How many people have... Let me explain something to you. There is no such thing as the perfect treatment center, and they're all relatively similar, guys.
How about just an open bed?
You're looking for, or you have that. That's a whole nother issue when you literally don't have any options. But sometimes you can have too many options, and you'll see people. It's paralysis by analysis. It's like, well, we also know he has anxiety. We also know he has depression and he has trauma, and that place says that it specializes in depression, anxiety, and trauma. This place, and this place over here does it because they have yoga on the beach. And okay, this place over here says they do it because they've hired an extra trauma therapist and they have horses. This place over here has horses, trauma therapists, yoga on the beach, and goats. So we're going to go over here. There's a thing called goat therapy, by the way. I've just started to learn about it. Probably one of the more disturbing things I've ever heard. So why do you do the rehab thing is mainly for this thing called behavioral containment. Some people cannot handle being in the world without drinking or using drugs, so let's get them somewhere that's safe, let's get them somewhere with qualified people. That's what you want. But after that, unless it's deep end mental health, right? Unless you have a deep end mental health issue like major league depression or schizophrenia or something like that, then maybe you want to start looking at other facilities.
Can I
Carol?
ask a quick question? If someone is, alcohol's their drug of choice, and they choose to use Vivitrol as an option, when can they do that? At what point?
So they have to be alcohol free. I'm not sure for the period of time that a person has to be alcohol free.
But it does work across the board.
They would prefer. I don't think they're going to give it to you if you walk in and you say I drank yesterday.
Right.
Probably 72 hours, that kind of thing. If it's opioids, you have to be going into withdrawal to get.
And how does Vivitrol?
Oh no, excuse me. If it's opioids, you got to be completely clean for a period of time. They'll usually do it out of rehab. Go ahead.
How does Vivitrol work on the brain for alcoholics?
It's one of those things that they're not sure.
Okay.
It's kind of like almost an off-label prescription. With prescription drugs, guys, how it works is here's what the prescription drug works for, and then there are these things called off-label prescribing. We have also found that this works for, but naltrexone, Carol, actually in that case it was indicated for alcohol. Now that I think of it, it was a pill form called Revia and also called a Camprosate.
Okay.
This is just a long-acting form. It tends to help specifically with cravings. I don't know what the mechanism is. Have you ever noticed, so if you think about mechanisms of how it works, I could have told you guys anything right there, and you would have believed me. How would you possibly know whether I was telling the truth? Let's rewind that a little bit. Hey, Carol, I'll tell you how it works. It works in the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, and combined in a synergistic relationship with serotonin.
And you know I'll remember all
Yes,
that, right?
yeah, you know, so get real. A lot of times people don't know why it works, and it's kind of like, if it works, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Keep going forward. Both those drugs, Vivitrol and the long-lasting Subuclade, is what's the deal there? It's long-lasting. It's here's your injection. You're going to come back again next month and get an injection, and we're not going to fight every day about you taking your meds.
Right.
And I also know you're not going to be giving it to somebody on the corner. So that's the attraction to a lot of those
And
drugs.
it gives their brain time to be without the drug or alcohol to think.
To be and well, it's real, and it really does for like any other medicine. It doesn't work for everyone, but for the people that have used Vivitrol, they will report less cravings. You guys, so when we talk about cravings for a minute, and we talk about the process involved there, so a craving, you have different ways of thinking about this. You have a thought of wanting to use. You have a thought of wanting to use. And what do I mean by that? Boy, it would be nice to get high. Man, I remember when I used to get high.
And
You know,
wine sure looks good.
sort of like, kind of like, yeah, that wine sure looks good. It's just a thought. It's kind of fleeting. It's sort of in one ear and out the other, right? And then you have an urge. An urge, you feel a little bit more in your body. You feel a little more drawn to it, but it tends to come and go. It doesn't tend to stick around. So it's kind of like, I have a thought that I want to go in there and eat a sleeve of Oreo cookies. I have an urge that I want to go in there, maybe when I'm walking by. And then you have a craving. And a craving feels like it's never going to go away. I don't know if you've ever had a craving for anything. But it feels like it's never going to go away. And it's similar to an urge, except it's more intense and it's repetitive. And it won't go away. And if you were in a person's head, it would be like, man, I really want to get that. I really want to get that. I really want to get that. You know, man, I need that. You know, man, I need that. That kind of thing. They will be very irritable. They will be very distant. They will have trouble interacting with you. They'll have trouble, you know, doing what they need to do. Their concentration is elsewhere. And here's the kicker, guys. A lot of people will say that they go and they use in the middle of a craving more to deal with the fact I just got to shut this off than the actual attractiveness of the drug. It becomes too much for the person to just deal with. Because if you've ever had the same thought for 15 minutes or 7 minutes, because some people say it lasts 7.5 minutes, some people say 15. You go ahead and want to get a piece of cheesecake for 15 minutes and see if you don't go get it. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference between I want to go get high and I want to go get high, 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 I want to go get high. Man, I remember being at work. I remember being at work when these opioids take over my life. And I remember, you know, trying to do my thing and having a lot of responsibility and talking to Carolyn, and thinking about where can I get pills. Almost like I'm two people, split in half, you know? And anxious, your anxiety starts to go up, your tension starts to go up. You know, imagine what it's like to operate like that. And then the fourth stage, or the fourth part of the process, is at some point in time you make a plan. So what do I mean by that? You think, here's where I could get it. If it's alcohol, that's very easy, right? But with alcohol, you think, here's how I'm going to get away with it. It's not, here's how I can get it. It's here's how I can drink and my wife's not going to know. Here's how I can drink and my boyfriend's not going to know, whatever it is. And once you get to that point, you've almost kind of entered no man's land. Like, at that point, you're going to have to make a phone call to somebody, or you're going to have to get out of Dodge. What triggers the craving and what triggers a person to go there is a lot of different things. A lot of it just could be the stage that they're in terms of the recovery, or it could be environmental triggers. It could be what they see. Every other commercial will be an alcohol commercial. The holidays are coming up. If you believe what you see in the media, it is absolutely impossible to enjoy the holidays unless you're getting torn up, right? Now, they're not going to actually show the reality of a Christmas party on these commercials, right? There's going to be a bunch of beautiful people dancing. Nobody's going to be throwing up in the corner. There's going to be no DUIs shown. You're only going to see the really good part that's going to attract you to the stuff and that feeling that you want to get. So that will trigger the upset. That'll trigger what? The thought, the urge, the craving, the plan. You get it? And so the deal is, people will try to fight that, man. And if you've ever heard the term white knuckling, it's really applying to that part of the process of, I'm just not going to do it. Let me show you how I'm not going to do it. But I want to do it. Have you ever really, really, really wanted to do something and not done it? Think about it. It sucks. Like, think about living every day of your life like that. So you give in and you go get it. Yes?
So where in that process, or is there a place in that process that we can, as rational people, figure out to stop them and say, okay, let's talk, let's get you into a program, whatever. Is there any way we can know, as the rational person here, okay, this is probably a good time to try and talk to her and get her to do something?
It depends. I mean, it's a fantastic question. So if that's the reality, and you feel like knowing what you know about your daughter or what you know about your son or anybody in here, I can clearly see that's the case. You can see it written all over your face, even on the days they're not using. You can see the misery. And then the question becomes, what can you do about it, right? And can you say something and can you talk about it? Absolutely, you can say something, you can talk about it. The problem's going to be is how much can you tolerate coming back at you, or how much do you want to tolerate coming back at you, and what type of boundaries do you want to set around that? Like, in other words, you know as well as I do that most people aren't going to respond favorably to those type of questions. So if you think, let's just think of a scenario. Let's just think of a person who's, maybe they've lapsed and they're back out there and they're doing their thing, and mom and dad are worried and they want to start asking. Most people that you put that out to are going to respond how?
I'm fine.
Yeah, or get the F out of my face. Leave me the F alone. So that's the problem. It isn't that, there's anything wrong with saying it. It's that you have to go into the conversation with your eyes wide open. You can also say to yourself, there's probably better ways to say that and worse ways. There's probably ways that would provoke a response. What's your goal whenever you want to bring that up? When you want to bring up, let's say the scenario could be the relapse that I just said, or it could just be you're concerned about your loved one. What is your goal of the conversation?
To get them to help.
To get them to help, okay.
If they'll accept it.
And I think to help them to play it forward, to think.
Okay, so
That's good.
to get them to help or help them to play forward, I would say that your goal is different than to get them to help. If it's just you having the conversation, I would say your goal is to plant a seed that might move them forward.
Okay.
And to just send a signal that we know what's up and we're worried about you. And hopefully you get a person to start thinking about that. But at the very least, you're saying something. Okay? I think if you go about it where you're thinking, I want to get you to treatment, if it's just you and you're having a conversation, I think you might be setting yourself up for a battle there, and you're certainly setting yourself up for disappointment.
So just say something like, we love you, and when you're ready, we'll help you.
Yeah, I know your situation, and so I can be kind of specific. I would say stuff like, we don't even have to play. I love you. We don't have to be silly about this and act like we don't know what's going on. I'm still deeply involved in FAVOR. I know where you're at with this process. I even understand why you're where you're at. I just need you to know that, like, I'm worried, and there are things that can get done, and it's clearly a problem, and that's all I have to say. Instead of like all that followed by, and now that's why I get in the car, we're going to go to rehab. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so just keep it short and simple.
Yes, and here's the thing, though. This is why they don't encourage parents to do it. This is why the people who don't encourage parents to do it, because, or spouses or whatever. Because the deal is that she is going to say, or anyone's going to say, "No, I'm fine. Come on, you don't even know what you're talking about. You have always been this way. I remember when I was 13 weeks old and you took that freaking binky off of me and that was unbelievably rude and you've always liked so-and-so better. I'm making all this up for drama.
That's, her roommate thinks I'm a real.
Right. So they are going to go there, and what will happen then is that the conversation will go from a seed plant to a defensive. And let me tell you, like, I do not blame any parent who can't handle that the right way, because it's not a counseling situation. But I will say this: I've seen parents, and I know I've been able to do this on occasion. I've seen them be able to have. Are you looking at my daughter when I said that? You're trying to say, yeah. Does he really do that? Yeah. I've seen situations where people have been able to ride that out and not react to it. You know what I mean?
Well, but it's like Thursday night when I was with a friend helping her daughter. I was a whole different person than I would have been if that was my kid.
Yeah.
But she asked me, how are you so
I think that's
it's
a
not my kid.
fantastic point. Yeah. It's a lot different when it's not your kid.
That's right.
Why is it a lot different when it's not your kid? All the obvious stuff. It's not all that water under the bridge, all that worry, all the emotions and everything that are involved. So, but back to your original point and this idea of can I say something and should I say something? Absolutely, but go into it with your eyes wide open. Going into it with your objectives wide open. Yes?
When our son was in rehab, one of the things that they said, and I thought really rang true, is any conversation go into from you.
Talk about,
I feel.
Yes.
I'm upset.
Yes.
It bothers me, not you do this, and I feel like that. Or you
So,
do that. Make it
absolutely. So when you want to talk about general communication strategies with somebody who's actively using, you absolutely want to talk about your own experience and your own feelings and use I statements. You want to try to avoid like a factual list of transgressions and this is why you have a problem because I know you do because here are the things that you've done. People can argue with you about that. They can explain to you how like, no, that's not the case. Everybody drinks like this or everybody does this. But what they cannot argue with you is your feelings. They cannot tell you that you don't feel the way you feel. I'm scared to death for you. No one can look at you and say, no, you're not. They can look at you and invalidate your feelings and say, well, you're overreacting or whatever, but they can't argue the point with you. Whereas if you try to make it about their behavior, you know this, it'll turn into this big, gigantic fight where basically they're going to spend the next half an hour explaining how you don't know what you're talking about, and you're going to leave the conversation thinking, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Have you ever had that happen?
Oh, yeah.
So what are the kind of go-to techniques that we learn in addict school? You guys want to hear some of them? That's a joke. There is no such thing as addict school. I've done that in here before, and I think you guys think that there's addict school. So the first day,
they all act the same. So
well, there are certain there's certain go-to things, and so like one is what I would consider like your standard lie. All right, and I'm not saying it's because all addicts are liars, cheaters, and thieves or anything. These are behaviors that come up. There are a lot of people who aren't addicts that are liars, cheaters, and thieves, right? This isn't But so the first thing is that it's basically black as white, and you kind of get away with it early on. You know what I mean? Like early on in the process, before everything is popped off, you get the benefit of the doubt. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. Where were you last night? Well, I was at Billy's. And why didn't you call? Well, I couldn't because my phone went dead. When in reality, you were off in Atlanta at some rave doing all kinds of drugs or whatever, right? And so you get into a situation like that. Then what happens is as time goes by, that starts to not work. Basically because people start to, well, that can't happen 17 times in a row. So then that's whenever people got to get, like, in different ways, they can go in different directions. So one strategy is they're just going to intimidate you. Now, this is the one where you probably are going to be most likely to detach and set serious boundaries, because the deal is I'm going to make you afraid of me, so you're going to give me what I want. How do they do? And remember, everybody can kind of roll into different areas in this way. I mean, I could go there and I could pull out of that kind of stuff. So that one goes down like what? Like literally, like you'll feel threatened. You'll wonder if you're safe in your own home. There'll be a lot of name calling. There'll be a lot of swearing. That is the one That's why they invented detachment and tough love. Do you get it? For that behavior. And I support it for that behavior. None of you deserve to be verbally abused. None of you. And so the deal is like how much of that, you've seen that, I'm sure. And again, I'm not saying if somebody loses at one time becomes a repetitive behavior. The second area is what I would call like emotional blackmail, or almost like threatening themselves in a way that you later look at and say, I don't think they were even serious about that. This will be the stuff around self-harm and suicide and things like that. Or I'm just not going to have anywhere to live. Or I'm never going to talk to you again. That's different than I'm going to, the intimidation, that is emotional blackmail. So if you look at situations where domestic violence occurs, and you think about a circumstance where a woman stays with a man even though she's getting hit, one of the most common behaviors is this guy is always saying stuff like, if you leave, I'll kill myself. Or, I can't believe you would do that after all I've done for you. And I mean, I'm your, and where it would play out with this is, I'm your son, and it's that type of stuff. That's called emotional blackmail, and it'll get you to go against your behaviors. It's a form of lying. It's a form of manipulation, mainly lying because why? They're not necessarily telling you how they genuinely feel. They're using their experience and their feelings to try to control you. You know what I'm talking about with that one? The third technique is what I would call is just like, there are some people who will go with, they're just charming. And they're going to kind of like, you're going to like them. It's going to be harder to say no. This is a guy that comes over to grandma's house and mows the yard so that she can give him $25 and he can steal her Oxycontins. You get it?
Or they're nice to everybody else but you.
Yeah, or they're nice to everybody else but you, like that kind of thing, right? So, if grandma keeps getting a call about the grass getting cut, you want to take a look at that. And then I think that this is one that's particularly problematic because it doesn't feel quite as blatant as some of the other things like emotional blackmail, but it's really problematic. And this is just what I call the war of attrition. And it's basically like, I am just going to continuously tell you how you're wrong and what you're seeing is not true. And I am just not going to give in a moment. And I'm going to stick to my guns. I did not do what you're saying I did. I just saw, this is like, I'm making up a scenario. Somebody's living in the basement. You walk downstairs and you see him snorting a line of cocaine off the
Mirror.
coffee table. Okay, so and you're like, what are you doing? Even though you just saw it, they just are basically not going to give you an inch and essentially say, you got to get out of my business. They're going to start talking about all kinds of other stuff. They're going to distract you, and the deal is at the end of that, you give in because you just simply can't even fight the fight anymore. This is what you have to be really careful of if you get into details and you don't focus on yourself, is the fifth category. That what will happen is that it will turn into this whole other debate and conversation, and you'll end the intervention or the intervention conversation without any progress because you just spent the last half an hour talking about something that happened in 1973 and how dare you come in my bedroom, and don't you know the privacy laws in the state of Idaho? And you're like, well, we live in South Carolina. Yeah, but that's precedent, and it's all this other stuff, and you're kind of like, and then you leave the situation questioning your own sanity. And you start to say to yourself, am I actually seeing what I think's going on here? Or have you ever said to yourself, maybe he's right?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe she's right, maybe I am, fill in the blank. Are there things that you need to change? Absolutely. But it's likely if you're sitting here that this thing has progressed so far that it isn't just you making it up. Do you get it? It's highly likely that your assessment of the situation is accurate. Can we all accept that? So, am I missing any of the common techniques? It's been a while it's been 19 years since I went. I graduated in the year 2001 from mag school. I graduated magna cum laude. I was valedictorian.
She agrees with everything I say.
There you go.
She agrees with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's also this idea of let me just tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now the problem with let me tell you what you want to hear is it can also extend to all kinds of systems and stuff, and it can happen when people are in jail and they're talking to social workers or hey, this is what's going to happen, and it's hard because you don't want to like argue them out of like the right thing. Do you guys get, so you got to go into every conversation around setting these boundaries and what do I do about jail and what do I do about, you know, trying to push the person back on the right track with a very clear understanding of how it's going to go down. If you go in there and you say to your loved one, I'm tired of this and there's some things that are going to be different, and they're like, okay, cool, I get it. That's not good. That's not how it's good. It's what you say and then what you do to back up what you say. And when you're communicating, it's probably better to what? The shorter, the better. The briefer, the better. The more concrete and black and white, the better. The more it is about you, the better. You get it? One other thing I want to say about this before we get into another area. I do want to say that if possible, maintaining some kind of other communication that has nothing to do with you need to get your act together. You know what I mean? Whether it's having lunch or having a phone call or whatever, it can be a helpful thing. We always try to encourage people to try to figure that out. You have to have rules around that, though. It can't be that you're going to lunch so that you can get shook down for an hour to get money. Do you get it? If you're able to have anything that resembles a relationship that's just, let's just talk, let's have lunch, that's always a good thing too. You have to, as a parent, what? Not bring up all the stuff. You can't be having lunch and halfway through, so how many meetings did you go to this week? And then expect them to like not turn it on. You know what I mean? There's a clip in the movie Beautiful Boy where David Schiff, he's played by Steve Carell, is going through this with his son. And the son gets very, very aggravated. And it's very realistic. It is a very, very realistic scene.
In a coffee house.
In a coffee, yeah. It's very realistic because the kid's like, damn it, Dad, I don't want to. And the dad can't help it. He literally can't control himself. He starts saying, but this isn't who you're supposed to be. This isn't how I raised you. And clearly the kid had come there under the impression they were just going to have lunch. Do you see it like so if you look at your original question of how do I ask and is it okay? It can't be like you ask every time I see you. And you got to mix it up, and it can't be like every time Mom calls, it's identified with this is her. She's going to try to get me into rehab. This is the rehab call. This is the rehab call. You know what I'm talking about? Because what will happen then, guys? Just think about it logically. What will happen if you are equated with this is the rehab call? You will stop getting the phone calls picked up. It's so difficult, but if doing that, if calling and saying let's go to rehab would work, I'd tell you to do it. You know what I mean? I would tell you to do it today. You have to. You're trying to find another way to sneak in whenever you're doing that stuff.
So if we go to lunch, we go to lunch.
If you go to lunch, you go to lunch, and it's not all about how are you doing, and it's not all about like did you go to therapy yesterday, or did you call Hubert, or did you do? It's almost like none of that.
Okay.
It's about the weather. See, one of the things that we do in our assertive community engagement program is we go to lunch with people. We meet people for coffee. And we can go and talk about nothing other than the Clemson game. And we can pull it off because we don't have the emotional connection. You know what I mean? And the staff have been trained to take the long game, the long view of this. Really hard for parents to do. And don't do it if you don't think you can do it. You know what I mean? But it is an option as you move through. So we have 20 minutes, and I want to move into one other thing, and I want to talk. So those are all like the practical issues that have come up tonight around what do we do in this situation, what do we do in that situation. I want to move into the how do you do it and what gets in the way of doing it. We've talked about this before. It's harder to say the right thing. It's harder to set a boundary if you're stressed out and you're losing your mind yourself. Agreed?
Yes.
It's hard to make good decisions. I don't know if you've ever had a situation where maybe you didn't get sleep the night before and you had to go to work and you have to interact with people. You know, that's always the day that you let the person know how you feel, right? The guy that you haven't said anything to all year. That your ability to control yourself goes way down. You know, when your worries go way up. So let's talk about some of the self-care stuff, and let's talk about some things that we can do. So I'm going to open it up to you guys first. When I say self-care, what do you think of? Does anybody have anything that comes to mind?
Going to the falls.
So you think of a particular place.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. Who else?
I say putting myself first.
Putting yourself first. Rather than totally like obsessing on your son and all day, every day, and yep.
Rich, can we take this current situation that's going on and talk her through what's
Yeah.
happening right now?
If you're comfortable with it.
Okay. Her husband just got out of Mount Sinai.
My son got
Your
out
son.
of rehab.
Yeah, and he was there, how long was he there?
30 days.
30 days. And soon after he came home, he started drinking, which was this week. And we've been talking, and just a few minutes ago, she got a call from her other son,
Well, it was him.
and he was screaming and yelling at you, and the other son
That's
said that
him.
he was out of control.
And that's him calling me again.
That's the other son.
No, this is the addict calling me now, and he just went ballistic on me. Do I answer?
Yeah.
He's absolutely out of his mind right now.
So I wouldn't answer that right this second. I would not answer that right this second. So, all right, so take a deep breath. Have you gone through this before? Have you ever had this level of acting out?
Yes. Not
Okay,
to-
so hold on a second. We're going to check out. I'm checking out of this.
Not